Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another meditation and Dhamma talk here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So, as usual, we'll start with a period of sitting meditation, and then I'll give a Dhamma talk. And then after the talk, I'll answer any questions that you have. So you're welcome to type in questions at any time. There's already some questions coming in, so we'll go through those questions after the talk is over. For now, please go ahead and get in meditation posture. Doing the usual preliminary practices of checking your posture, relaxing your face, taking a few breaths, long, slow, deep breaths to relax the body and mind. And remind yourself that the meditation practices that you're beginning now are following the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings given by every enlightened being throughout past, present, and future. We are walking the same path that everyone who has attained enlightenment has walked. We're walking the same path that every single Arhat, every single Bodhisattva, every single Buddha has walked. There's nothing to fear in this path. So we can trust in the wisdom of the Buddhas as we engage in the practices that they teach. So go ahead and start by bringing attention to your body. Just feeling the body as a single object. A single object contained within mind, within the vast field of mind. This vast field of mind, which includes sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. That includes thought, emotion, memory, impulse. And holding attention steady within that vast, all-encompassing field of mind. And gradually let go of the concept of separate objects. There's no need to differentiate the different parts of the body from each other. There's no need to differentiate the body from the cushion it's sitting on or the air around it. or from the building it's in, or from the whole physical world. There's no need to differentiate any external objects from one another. There's no need to differentiate objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. It's all just mind. There's no need to project separations between things. There's no need to relate to the world in terms of objects, distinct separate objects. So we can let that whole way of relating to the world fade away. So the reification of separate objects is an activity. When we stop performing that activity, the illusion of separate objects begins to dissolve. You might start to become aware of a vast formlessness, undulating, rippling formlessness. In which objects seem to appear and vanish. But as long as we don't latch on to any seeming object, any apparent thing that appears, as long as we don't latch on to it, it has no lasting substance. So don't pay attention to any specific object. Let the mind rest in that awareness of vast formlessness. And if this practice seems too difficult, then you can just do mindfulness of the body. But see if you can. See if you can let go of objects, let go of activities, and with bright, attentive alertness, pay attention to formlessness, all pervasive, unshaped formlessness. If you notice you've gotten wrapped up in some activity, fixating on some object, just relax your grip and let it melt away. Don't try to push it away. Don't try to destroy it. Just release your grip and let it melt away on its own. Okay, you can release your posture and slowly massage your body a little bit if you need to. And hello to everyone who's joining in. So hello, Ricardo, Ron, Kaiser Friend, Miguel, Elaine, Secret Spy Records, Putrika, Geeta, Mark, Liz, and Mary. Good to see all of you joining in. And go ahead and start with paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So today is the second of 3 talks on Vipassanā. So yesterday I gave a general overview of the subject and spoke a bit about 3 primary overall strategies. So focusing either on impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, or on not self. And particularly emphasizing the perception of impermanence. So these are 3 of the standard classic Theravada methods for developing insight. So anicca sanya, dukkha sanya, and anatta sanya. So the recognition of that all things are impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal. But the meditation that we just did is another approach to Vipassana practice, which is spoken about in the Theravada suttas as well, but is much more common in Mahayana Buddhism. So this is a style of meditation which in the Pali Suttas it's called animitta samadhi, which means objectless concentration. So samadhi with the samadhi of no objects. In Mahayana Buddhism, it's commonly called silent illumination. Well, that's one word that's one term that's used for it, especially in Chan Buddhism, the Chinese Zen tradition. In Soto Zen, it's more commonly called shikantaza, which means just sitting. But all of these terms are talking about what's fundamentally the same practice, which one of the great Japanese Zen masters, so Zen master Dogen, he summed up the meditation practice very simply as dropping off body and mind. Drop off body, mind. That's what he said, 4 words, drop off body, mind. So dropping off body and mind. I actually wish I could just end the talk right there because that's already saying enough. But I should keep talking for a few more minutes. There's some laughter from the in-person audience here. So fundamentally what this is doing is it's starting from the recognition that the appearance of separate objects is the function of delusion. It's a function of self-centeredness. It's a function of me relating to other. So And also recognizing that, once again, as I mentioned during the meditation, it's an activity that we're engaging in. So every moment we are performing the activity of chopping up our experience into a bunch of different mm, discrete areas and segments, and pretending that each of those areas are separate things. Pretending that each of those segments represent something which has an inherent existence separate from everything else. But this runs completely contrary to what the Buddha taught. So the Buddha taught that everything which appears to exist only in terms of its relationship to other things that appear to exist. And he also spoke about how when you remove something, then you also remove everything else which is dependent upon it, which is, by extension, the entire phenomenal universe. So this is dependent origination, paticca samuppada. The interconnectedness, the interdependent, interrelated nature of all apparently existing phenomena. And I say apparently existing because, as the Buddha clearly states in the Kaccanagotta Sutta and in many other places, you can't actually speak of things as either existing or as not existing. It doesn't apply. One who recognizes how things come into being can't possibly say that anything doesn't exist. They wouldn't possibly say that something is non-existent. And one who recognizes the cessation of things couldn't possibly speak of anything as existing. Even when something appears to exist, one who understands the nature of cessation realizes that it doesn't really exist. So this is what the Buddha says in the Kaccanagotta Sutta. He says that one who recognizes the arising of things doesn't believe in anything as non-existent, and doesn't believe that it's possible for things to not exist. And one who recognizes the cessation of things doesn't believe in existence. They don't believe that anything exists, that anything has any real substance to it. So it's holding these two perspectives in mind and recognizing that they are non-contradictory. As with so many things in Buddhism, it's two viewpoints which on the surface appear to be mutually contradictory, but which are actually in perfect harmony with each other and are simply two ways of talking about the same thing, two seemingly opposite ways of communicating the same fundamental truth. So similarly, in the meditation practice that we were doing, when we stop creating the appearance of separate objects, then we start to become aware of formlessness. And formlessness is not nothingness. That would be the view of non-existence. But at the same time, there's no specific things to be found within formlessness. If there were specific things, well, that's falling into the view of existence. So then doing this meditation is effectively enacting the instructions the Buddha gave in the Kaccanagotta Sutta, as well as many other places in the Theravada Suttas, as well as extensively in the Mahayana Sutras, of course. It's putting into practice this way of seeing which goes beyond the concepts of existence and non-existence. And in the Kaccanagotta Sutta, the Buddha says that this is what he means by right view. This is how you define a person who has right view. It's somebody who is not stuck with either existence or non-existence, someone who's not constrained by these limited beliefs of things existing or not existing. One who sees that which is beyond existence and non-existence. Which, when you start talking about it, it all sounds very complex and abstract and philosophical, but the actual practice is very simple. There's a really lovely Zen story. There was a family of Buddhist practitioners. So they all were very dedicated practitioners, and they would meditate together, and they followed the precepts very strictly, and they were all very knowledgeable in the Buddhist teachings. And there's a conversation recorded, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because I don't remember the exact details. But there's the so the mother and the father, the daughter and the son, they're having a conversation about Buddhist practice, and they're specifically actually talking about this very subject, which is directly perceiving formlessness, going beyond existence and non-existence, perceiving that which is not affected by the concepts of existence and non-existence. So they're talking about this practice of silent illumination or objectless samadhi. And one of the family members says, "Oh, difficult, like finding a needle in the haystack. So difficult. And then one of the other family members, if I recall correctly, it's the daughter. The daughter says, easy, like stepping out of bed into your slippers. So this actually has always really stuck with me. This imagery of this meditation as being like in the dark, you step out of bed into these warm, soft, cozy slippers, and it's easy, it's natural, it's comfortable. It's not a struggle. The story goes on from there, by the way. As I recall, one of the other family members says, neither difficult nor easy, and it develops from there. But I especially want to emphasize is this one imagery that was used of, again, like getting out of bed in the dark and you putting your feet into your slippers. So you can't quite see what you're doing, but there's a sense of ease and comfort that comes with it. So it's not some nightmarish escapade. There's a sense of uncertainty, but also a sense of comfort and ease and simplicity. And that's the actual practice here. So this practice of the direct perception of formlessness is somewhat challenging to get to intellectually. But once one has that intellectual foundation, the actual practice is actually not that complicated. The actual practice is quite simple. Just stop creating objects. And of course, you need to start by recognizing that we're creating objects all the time. You need to start by recognizing that everything that we think of as a distinct, separate object is a figment of our own imagination. It's not that there's nothing there, but rather it's that the separations between things is something that we're inventing moment after moment. So you need to start by recognizing that it's an activity we're engaging in. And one needs to recognize that activity is the source of dukkha. That activity is the source of it's a manifestation of delusion and a source of further delusion. It's a manifestation of self-identity. It's a manifestation of this self-centered self-obsessiveness that's at the heart of all of our suffering. And recognizing that it's possible for that to stop. It's possible to stop that activity. An image that the Buddha uses in the Vitakkasanthana Sutta, the sutta on settling thoughts, on pacifying thoughts, or stilling thoughts. The Buddha, he uses at one point this image of someone who is running, who then thinks, why am I running? Maybe I should slow down to a walk. So they slow down to a walk. And then as they're walking, they start thinking, why am I walking? I don't really need to go anywhere. So they come to a standstill. And as they're standing, they're like, I don't need to put forth the effort of standing. I can sit down. So they sit down. And as they're sitting down, they think, well, I don't need to make the effort to stay sitting up. I can just lie down. So they lie down. So similarly, with this activity of creating objects, we're doing it all the time, like somebody who's running full speed, someone who's sprinting. It's this frenetic, hectic, agitated activity that we're doing all the time. And we're so used to doing it that we don't even realize that we're doing it. So the first step is recognizing, oh, I'm wildly, frantically, chaotically creating this illusory experience of a bunch of distinct separate objects interacting with me. Oh, well, that's not really necessary. Maybe I can slow things down a little bit. So with this meditation practice, we're slowing down the process. So it tends to have a feeling a little bit like when you start with a block of ice, and then the block of ice starts slowly melting. And you get to this kind of intermediate phase where it's kind of half liquid, half solid. That tends to be what it's like when we're still fairly new to this particular form of meditation. You get to this point where the mind is kind of drifting uh, in and out of its normal state of perceiving a bunch of seemingly solid, distinct objects, and into a state where starting to become aware of this spacious field of formlessness within which those apparent objects are floating, kind of like chunks of ice floating in water that's just slightly above freezing. And as we relax more and more into that formlessness, that's like the water warming up a bit, so that more and more of the fragments and chunks of ice start to melt away, start to melt into that pool of warm water. So in the same way, we start to relax into formlessness. We stop projecting the appearance of separate things, and things start to melt away. But there still can be these ghostly flashes of things, of appearances of things coming and going within that field of formlessness, and that's okay. That's it too. That's also part of reality being what it is. So we're not trying to reject the phenomenal world. We're not trying to reject the experience of separate objects, but rather we're putting it in its proper context and its proper place. We're not taking it seriously as we used to. We're not placing all of our bets on it, so to speak. We're not investing ourselves completely in the belief in existent, ongoing, persistent objects. So this meditation practice, then, it's quite simple in practice, but quite complex in theory. And that's what tends to make it so difficult. The other thing that makes it really difficult is how incredibly strong our habits are. Our habits of relating to the world in terms of distinct objects, interacting with the distinct object that we call me. So that also makes it quite challenging. Which is why it's often helpful to do preliminary practices. So doing more standard object-based meditations, so such as mindfulness of the body, or mindfulness of breathing, or loving kindness meditation. So more standard object-based meditation practices, which help to stabilize the mind and bring a sense of attentiveness and clarity and calmness. Helps to clear away some of the coarser defilements from the mind. Starts to generate a certain amount of samadhi, a certain amount of mindfulness. That's all quite helpful. And also doing some of the more active forms of insight meditation. So cultivating the recognition of impermanence. So cultivating the recognition of dukkha as a way of helping us break our attachment to apparent objects and apparent activities. One of the reasons we tend to hold on to the perception of objects is because we think that those objects are going to bring us pleasure. When we recognize that no object or activity is inherently pleasurable, no object or activity can bring us to enlightenment, no object or activity can cause true happiness. When we recognize that, then it's much easier to let go of those objects and activities. We see that holding on to them is not bringing us any benefit. In fact, it's just making us uncomfortable. Trying to hold on to something that can't be held on to. It's just causing ourselves pain. So it also helps quite a bit. And of course, the recognition of not self, because in letting go of objects, we're letting go of our relationship to those objects. Again, you might not think that the carpet is a manifestation of your self-identity, but actually, you have a way of relating to that carpet. You have attitudes and feelings around that carpet. You have a concept of that carpet. And all of that is part of who you think you are. All of it is part of the mass complex formation of me and mine, my perceptions, my ideas, my beliefs, my preferences. For example, I have a preference for silent clocks. So having a noisy ticking clock in the room is something which brings up a lot of self-identity for me. It's always quite a struggle for me. But fundamentally, the clock is not me. It's just a clock. And technically, it's not even that. And the ticking sound, it's not me, and it's not inherently unpleasant. It's not inherently distracting. It's not anything at all, in fact. So this whole thing of believing that ticking clocks are annoying, well, that's just a manifestation of my personality. It's a manifestation of my self-identity. It's a manifestation of my adherence to a rigid sense of self. And then those moments when that rigid sense of self is dropped, then the ticking of the clock no longer matters. And that's when it can come to an end. It can melt away into formlessness, or it can persist, and either way it doesn't matter, because the self-identity around it is dissolved. So cultivating the recognition of not self is also a valuable preliminary for doing this objectless meditation, because this objectless meditation necessarily involves the relinquishment of self-identity, bit by bit and piece by piece. And another way of looking at it then is that this objectless meditation then naturally encompasses all of the three other perceptions. It naturally encompasses the perception of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. It's a natural manifestation of all of those practices. And it is still also a form of samadhi. So in this practice, the mind becomes extremely still, because there's no objects to move towards, there's no activities to engage in. The mind is resting in complete stillness and alertness, which are the two defining characteristics of samadhi: stillness and alertness. So then this is one example of a practice which is simultaneous samadhi and vipassana. A practice which is the conjunction, the union of concentration and wisdom. So this is, historically, it's always been one of my favorite meditation methods, though I don't use it all the time. In fact, I use it less than half the time. But it's one that I always find deeply nourishing, deeply satisfying, but also recognizing that it doesn't necessarily work in every state of mind. So this is one reason why it's important to have familiarity with several different methods. So there are some states of mind where trying to practice animitta samadhi just seems utterly futile. It just doesn't really seem to do anything at all. It doesn't seem to bring any benefit. And in those states of mind, it's usually better to use a object-based or activity-based form of meditation. So whether in the field of samatha or vipassana, doesn't matter. One evaluates the mind and sees, well, what method is going to be most helpful? in bringing this mind closer to tranquility and insight, and bringing this mind more in tune with the mind of a Buddha. And often the answer to that may be silent illumination practice, anamitta samadhi. But often it may not be. Often it may be doing something else. It may be doing loving kindness meditation, or maybe doing mindfulness of the body, or it might be doing the recognition of impermanence, or the meditation on the 6 elements, or any of a number of different methods. But it's having that flexibility, that familiarity with different methods, and that degree of self-awareness, which allows us to know which methods are right for that moment. So in the Zen schools, they often say that this method is the universal method that always works in all places and all times for all people. And that's theoretically true, but in practicality, it's not quite true. In practicality, there often are other methods which are more expedient, depending on the conditions you're facing. But this is one method which is very important to have in your toolkit. And it is something which often if you're practicing with object-based meditations and it's just really seems like a struggle, and you really just want to relax a little bit, and you switch to objectless meditation, and sometimes it's like stepping out of bed and putting your feet into those nice, warm, cozy, soft slippers, and you're just like, yes, that is exactly what the mind needs right now. So keeping this as an option that you can switch to from time to time, but also being very attentive to what's happening. So one of the dangers of this method is that it very easily reverts to spaciness, daydreaming, and distraction. It very easily can switch into wandering thoughts about random things. So be very attentive when practicing with this method. And if you notice that you keep falling into distraction or dullness or spaciness or wandering thoughts, then switch to an object-based method, something which gives a more solid, stable foundation for the mind, and practice with that for as long as you need to. So knowing what's right for the mind in each moment, and always bringing the mind towards deeper serenity and wisdom. So I think that's all I have to say for today. So again, as Master Dogen said, just drop off body and mind. That's all. And that's all you have to do. So at this time, I'll go through some questions. So first off, one of the residents here wrote out some questions and handed them to me before the talk. So I'll start with these. The first question says, yesterday you spoke of the discordant, uneasy, fearful feelings that sometimes come from Vipassana practice. Do you see reflection on the triple gem or metta practices helping with this? Yeah, so reflections on the triple gem in particular. So as we did at the beginning of this meditation, bringing to mind that these practices that we're engaging in were taught by enlightened beings. They were practiced by those beings in order to attain enlightenment. They are universal throughout space and time. So all enlightened beings teach these same things, practice these same things, each according to their specific conditions. But the overall principles remain exactly the same, because it's a unerring law of reality. It's like the law of gravity. It's not like gravity functions completely differently in Russia than it does in Spain. It's just gravity. So in the same way, the Dhamma functions exactly the same in all places and all times. So we're just following exactly the same path that everybody who has ever attained enlightenment has followed. So that can help to bring up a sense of of courage and confidence. It's like, well, we don't have anything to worry about because we're just following the path to awakening. That's all. And also, the Buddha is quite clear that we're not going to lose anything along the way except for our suffering. So we don't have to worry about losing anything, because all that we're going to lose is our dukkha. And as long as we prioritize letting go of dukkha, then we won't be afraid of letting go of anything else, because we'll recognize that it's just letting go of dukkha. So metta practice, I haven't really thought of as being a way of dealing specifically with the discomfort that can come from Vipassana practice, because the discomfort that comes from Vipassana practice is usually related to a fear of letting go, a fear of relinquishment, a fear of losing something. So that's more what needs to be targeted. So recognizing, again, as the Buddha said in the Kachanagota Sutta, what arises is just dukkha, and what ceases is just dukkha. So we don't need to worry about anything ceasing, because it's just dukkha ceasing. And we don't need to seek out the arising of anything, because that would just be seeking out dukkha. So the willingness to let go of all things is a critical component of overcoming the fear of vipassana. And one way we do that is through recognizing that we're just letting go of dukkha, that's all. We're not letting go of anything valuable or important. Then the second question says, it has been my experience with Vipassana practices, at times there is not an immediate effect. That's true. At times it seems it might be hours, days, weeks, and then I may be reflecting on the Dhamma, listening to a Dhamma talk or reading, and like a bolt of lightning, I am hit with what feels like a deep realization or experience of the Dhamma. Is this typical? I don't know if typical would be the right word, but it's not uncommon. These things do happen. I actually sometimes find that where deep realizations come for me is while teaching. So I'll study the Dhamma and learn the Dhamma and practice meditation and contemplate the Dhamma and reflect on it and so on. And that'll bring a certain level of understanding. But then when I'm explaining it, then something manages to open up a little bit, and it works a little bit deeper into my mind. And something can start to loosen up inside the mind, which I hadn't realized before was stuck. So yeah, it's not uncommon. It can certainly happen that flashes of realization or flashes of insight can happen outside of meditation practice. So this is something, we actually spoke about it in a sutta recently, Circumstances of Liberation, I think it's called, where the Buddha talks about how one can have some deep realization under many different conditions. So while reading the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma, or teaching the Dhamma, or while doing meditation practice, there's many circumstances. Then it says, do Vipassana practices ready the mind for later insights? Yeah. I mean, realistically, all we're doing is preparing ourselves for the moment when we finally let go of our sense of self. Everything up until then is just preparation. But that's the big one. That's the monumental leap, which really nothing can prepare us for. But we prepare for it as best we can. One of the interesting things about Ajahn Mahabua's description of his own enlightenment is he talks about getting to the stage right before full enlightenment. And he says that when he came to that stage, he was completely enamored with it. And he said this is more or less what happens to everyone as they get to this second to last point, and they just naturally get completely stuck there. They get to a point where it seems like you finally hit the bedrock truth of reality, and you're like, yes, this is amazing. And he said he was stuck there for a really long time. And he doesn't say what he means by a really long time. He said he was stuck there for a really long time. I don't know if that means days, weeks, months, or years. But that eventually he realized that that also was just another conditional experience. And that letting go of that and going beyond it required him to take the mind in a direction which was completely unexpected, completely unfamiliar, not at all what he thought. So that final leap, which is leaping from the conditioned to the unconditioned. And that's a gigantic leap because the only thing we have ever known is the conditioned. So to leap to the unconditioned requires us to go in a direction we don't even know exists. One simile is like if you have a two-dimensional being living on a two-dimensional plane, and you're asking it to move up. And it's like, what do you mean up? I know forward, backward, left, and right. I don't know up and down. These words don't mean anything. And it's like, well, you have to move up. That's the way to go. It's completely outside their domain of thinking because they can only think in two dimensions. That's what it's like. We can only think of the world in terms of conditional phenomena. And the Buddha is asking us to direct the mind to the unconditioned. And it's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? That's completely outside the domain of my experience. But nonetheless, that's what we have to do. So one way of looking at Buddhist practice is that it's all just preparing the mind for that one monumental, inconceivable leap from the conditioned to the unconditioned. Anyway, next question. Ricardo asks, from what I know, Anapana is mostly a samadhi practice. I wonder if you think practicing merely sila and samadhi, one can reach enlightenment? So Anapana just means breathing, by the way. Anapana literally means inhaling and exhaling. That's what it means. When people say Anapana, they normally are referring to anapanasati, which means mindfulness of breathing. Mindfulness of breathing is not exclusively a samadhi practice. So in the Buddha's 16-step mindfulness of breathing meditation instructions, which is one of the most detailed meditation instructions the Buddha gives in the whole canon. So 16 discrete steps of practice. The first few are about mindfulness and samadhi, but then after that he goes into Vipassanā practice. So all the things I've been talking about, impermanence and relinquishment and letting go and all of that. So Anapanasati, you can use it as a pure samadhi practice. And in fact, most of the people I know who do Anapanasati, that's actually what they do. They're just using it as a samadhi practice. But it's also a great way to practice Vipassana meditation. And in fact, it lends itself quite well to the recognition of impermanence, because the breath is clearly an impermanent phenomenon. It's constantly changing. And there's times when it's present and times when it's absent. And while it seems to be present, it's also very ethereal, ephemeral. So I don't agree that Anapanasati is a samadhi practice. It can actually lend itself quite well to Vipassana as well. As to the second part of your question, no, you cannot attain enlightenment just through sila and samadhi. But you also cannot reach enlightenment without sila and samadhi. But what's missing with sila and samadhi, what's missing is wisdom. So you can have good morality and a very stable mind, but no understanding of anicca, dukkha, anatta. And then you won't attain enlightenment. You'll just have a very pleasant life, and then you'll die and be reborn somewhere pleasant and have a nice time, and then you'll die. And eventually you'll start making mistakes and doing unwholesome things, and then you'll start having unpleasant experiences. And before you know it, you're right back in the whole meat grinder of samsara. So then Ricardo asks, you mentioned yesterday that reading the suttas was essential for progress on the path. Do you have a sutta recommendation for me to start? Yeah, I usually recommend starting with Bhikkhu Bodhi's anthology, In the Buddha's Words. It's quite a good selection of discourses from the suttas arranged in a logical sequence. Then after you've read through that, then to just start reading through the Nikayas one by one. Middle length discourses first, the Majjhima Nikaya, then Samyutta, then Anguttara, then Digha. So that's the order I recommend. So middle length, connected, numerical, and long, in that order. Then Gita asks, Bhante, is formlessness similar to emptiness, or are they different? And how are they different if so? I actually use the words more or less interchangeably. So I kind of pulled a fast one on you, and then this was basically a talk about emptiness. I was just not using the word emptiness, which actually the Buddha does all the time in the Pali Canon. He talks about emptiness very, very often. He just doesn't use the word emptiness all the time. But yeah, I use them as effectively interchangeably. Yeah. Chandrasekhar asks, how will be an empty mind? What will it do? Well, you'll find out when you have one. And it won't do anything, which will be delightful. Secret Spy Records asks, can dropping off body and mind be dangerous? No. Every single bodhisattva has performed the act of dropping off body and mind, and by doing so has attained full enlightenment. Nothing dangerous about that. Bhavani asks, how to deal with spaciness and go back to meditation? Well, the first thing is recognizing that you're spacey. Then cultivate a sharp, clear attention to your body. Sometimes if you're really spacey, sometimes it helps to, well, first off, open your eyes. If your eyes are closed, open your eyes. This is very important. For dullness, spaciness, daydreaming, drowsiness, open your eyes. Don't try to do it with eyes closed. It's not going to work very well. Direct sharp attention to your body. If that's still not working terribly well, you can try moving attention through the body slowly until the mind is sharp and alert, and then you can let the mind be still again. If even that's not helping, then sometimes it's helpful to do a slow body movement just to bring the mind more clearly to the body. So for this, your hands are actually really good. So like gently rubbing your thumbs together or gently rubbing your fingers together a little bit, just to help get you a clear sense like, yes, this is my body. It's right here. It's not anywhere else. And then once you've reestablished that attention to your body, then let the body be still again. But try to keep that sharp attention. Also, standing up can be great. Standing meditation is really underappreciated. So everyone loves to talk about sitting meditation, and then walking meditation takes a very distant second place. Standing meditation, almost nobody talks about standing meditation, but I had some incredible experiences doing standing meditation. So if you don't have much experience with it, try. Do 30 minutes of standing meditation and to see what it's like. And you'll start to see that it has a place. So I don't use it that often, but it's in my toolkit, and every now and then, it's just the right thing. Especially during retreats. Every now and then during retreat, you get to a point where sitting meditation is not working, but walking meditation doesn't seem like the right thing either. And you want something in between. Well, good news. There's something in between. It's called standing. So it's good to have that option for you. So that's the end of the questions. If there's any more questions, you can save them for tomorrow evening. So tomorrow evening will be there's one more question. Okay, I'll take this one. Mark asks, can you explain the phrase sudden awakening, slow enlightenment? That is it possible to reach the unconditioned state and then fall back? Sudden awakening, slow enlightenment. phrase sounds familiar, um, but I don't remember off the top of my head how it's used. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. Um, if you could give some context, that would help. But just off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Is it possible to reach the unconditioned state and then fall back? It's possible to get hazy glimpses. That's actually what we're doing when we're practicing Anamitta Samadhi, is we're getting like a hazy glimpse of the unconditioned. Starting to get the vaguest sense of what it is. But full immersion in the deathless, full immersion in the unconditioned produces an irreversible transformation of mind, which one cannot lose. You can't regress from that. So that's the end of the questions. Again, if you have more questions, you can save them for tomorrow evening, which will be the last in this series of 3, and it's also the last talk you'll see from me for a couple of months. So that's your final opportunity tomorrow evening. So we'll go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you tomorrow.